Hello and welcome to this video giving you a tour of the human rights data we have for the United Kingdom. So the first thing to do is to go to this website, the Rights Tracker. So you can see up here www.rightstracker.org. I will point out that the website is available in 5 different languages, so feel free to navigate in a different language if that's what you'd prefer to do. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to search United Kingdom, and we can go and see the United Kingdom page. So when you go to a country, you'll land on this at a glance page here. This page is a summary of all of the data that we have. So you can just see all of the data we have represented here in graphs, kind of a summary page. And if you would like to, you can download simply this page as a PDF, and it's a one-page PDF which you can attach to your reports or to any of your documents. The first thing I'd like to do is go and look at the quality of life scores. So if we go to the quality of life tab here, we can see a little bit more detail. Now, what do these scores actually show? What we're measuring is how well a country is meeting its human rights obligations compared to its level of income. So for quality of life rights, that is the right to education, food, health, housing, and work. In international law, income is relevant. So according to progressive realization, countries should be doing the best they can with the resources they have. So what we do is we take indicators on the right to education, for example, enrollment rates and quality reading and maths indicators, and then we compare those to the country's level of income. So for the United Kingdom, which is a very high income country, we compare it to other countries with a similar level of income. And the best performance is what we calculate to be 100%. So 100% is what we are saying the United Kingdom can do with the resources it has to guarantee the right to education. Anything less than 100% means that this country is not meeting its international obligations and that it's not using its resources to the best of its ability to guarantee these rights. So what we see here on this summary score for quality of life is that the United Kingdom, the government is doing 81.1% of what is possible at its level of income to guarantee quality of life rights. Now, 81.1% might sound like a fairly good score when you think of when you think of test scores, for example. If you got an 81.1%, you might be quite happy with that. That might sound like quite a good score. But fundamentally, what we're saying is that they can do 100%, and anything less than 100% is a fail, essentially. So if you sort of think of it as completion of a task, if you were to ask someone you live with to do the dishes and they came back and they said, I did 81.1% of the dishes, you'd be a bit disappointed because that means you now have to do about 20% of the remaining dishes. So you do expect someone, if you ask them to do the dishes, to do all of the dishes. And that's what we're saying here. The United Kingdom has promised to do the best it can to fulfill these rights, and it's falling short of its obligations because it's not reaching 100%. So for the right to education, 85.2%, the United Kingdom is doing 85.2% of what is possible at its level of income to protect the right to education. And to help you out, we've got these bands underneath just to help you interpret the scores a little bit. So we can see that the right to education just falls between the bad and the fair band, so 85.2%. So that's actually falling in the fair band. So we can say that the United Kingdom's performance on the right to education is a fair performance. But if we look here, for example, on the right to work, 59.6% of what is possible to guarantee the right to a job and the right to adequate income. So this is a very bad score. And you can see it's actually in this range here called very bad. 59.6% for a country with the amount of resources that United Kingdom has, they should be doing a lot better than this. So it's interesting to see that on the right to work and on the right to housing, both of the UK scores are very bad. And then on the right to health and the right to education, it's a fair score. And then on the right to food, we see they've got a good score. But again, we are expecting 100% on all of these scores. So 100% is what we calculate to be possible without any increased income, simply with the income that the United Kingdom already has. If we scroll down a little bit, we do have some paragraphs here just with a little bit of information that's written down. You're welcome to copy paste any of these sentences and use them in your reports or in your articles. They just give a bit of a summary of what's happening here. So we can see here the United Kingdom has some way to go to meet its immediate economic and social rights duty. And compared to other high-income countries, the UK is performing close to average on these rights. So if we scroll down a little bit on quality of life, we have a lot more detail for each of these rights. So for example, on the right to education, the UK's overall score is 85.2%, but we can go into a little bit more detail and look at some of the particular indicator scores. So for example, on the right to secondary education, the United Kingdom is doing 96% of what we calculate to be possible at its level of income. So again, this is one of our HRMI scores. We are not saying 96% of children are in secondary education. We are saying the UK is doing 96% of what is possible. If you would like to see the underlying indicator values, you can do that by clicking on this button here. And now we do actually have the secondary school enrollment rate. So that is saying 97.1% of children at the age of secondary school are enrolled in school. But if we move back to the HRMI scores, we can see, for example, on PISA scores, so on quality education for maths, reading, and science, 2 of these scores fall in the very bad range and 1 of them falls in the bad range. So again, for quite a high income country with a lot of resources, it's a really poor showing to have very bad scores. And you can see this information for quite a few different rights, depending on what you're interested in. So if we were to look, for example, on the right to work, we can see the overall score is 59.6%. So the UK is doing 59.6% of what is possible at its level of income to guarantee the right to work. And on the right to a fair income, the UK is only doing 56.8% of what's possible. And on the right to a job, it's only doing 62.3% of what's possible. And these are very low scores. You can see they're quite low in the very bad range. The UK can do a lot better. So feel free to play around with whichever rights you're most interested in. If we scroll down a little bit lower, we also have some information that's disaggregated by sex. Now this, I'm going to explain this. It might seem a little bit complicated to some of you, but what we're doing here, we are not directly comparing the right to education for women and for men. We are not saying that women compared to men in the UK have these scores. What we're doing here is we're looking at the female right to education in the UK compared to other countries. So compared to other countries with similar level of income, the UK is doing 85.3% of what is possible on women's right to education. And on men's right to education, it's doing 84.9% of what is possible compared to other countries. You cannot directly compare men and women on these scores because we know that the standards are quite different for men and women. So we're comparing how women are doing compared to other countries. And you can have these scores for quite a few different things. So for example, we look at children's right to health. Again, these are fairly similar. So the UK is doing 98.1% of what is possible to protect women and girls' right to health. So we can scroll down a little bit further and we have these over time graphs. These are really, really interesting to see how some of these indicators change over time. So for our quality of life overall score, we only have the full overall score from 2015. So previous to that, there may have been one of the indicators missing, meaning we couldn't produce an overall score. However, if we look at some of the other indicators like secondary education, we were able to get indicators on the right to education from 2017. So we have a longer range that we can look at. And you can look at all people, you can look specifically at women or women and men. And you can play around with these. If we look at some scores, for example, I believe the right to work, you can see that there's been a little bit of up and down, but there's not been any significant increase. So since 2007, the United Kingdom hasn't actually done any better on improving the right to work. And if we look at the right to a job, we can actually see that from 2009, there was a really big dip. And since then, they've sort of managed to come back to where they were in 2007, but there's been no actual increase on the right to a job. So this is this shows that United Kingdom is not using its resources as best it could to protect people's right to a job. Now we have some people at risk data here. Now this data actually comes from a different methodology we have. We're not looking at how these indicators are performing compared to a country's level of income. So I will cover the people at risk data, but I'll do that in a few minutes. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come back up to the top of our page here. And for some of you, this might be enough information. You've got what you need and you understand these quality of life scores. But if you're someone who is quite interested in the data and you want to find out a little bit more of the information we do have more information. So what you can do is you can go to switch view. So what we're looking at the moment is how well the United Kingdom is using its resources compared to its level of income. What you can change to is you can change to this button here called Global Best. And what this is doing is this is showing how well the UK is doing, not compared to its level of income, but compared to all countries in the world, no matter how rich or poor they're doing. And so 100% in this situation, it actually means being the absolute best in the world. So for example, on the right to education, the United Kingdom would need to do significantly better to reach its income adjusted 100% mark. So these dots here represent how much more the country can achieve with the resources it has. Now, if it were to do those improvements and reach 100% and then wanted to become the best in the world, then it would need to do even more improvement to become the best country in the world on the right to education. I'm going to switch this back to income adjusted just so that we can see. Do remember to switch these back if you're using them. Now, another thing we have is that we use the indicators that we think are most relevant to that country. So for example, the United Kingdom is a high income country. So we use indicators that we group as high income indicators that are more pertinent to the situation in the UK. However, we can look at the low and middle income scores. So for the indicators that we measure, for example, enrollment rates or primary enrollment rates, secondary enrollment rates, if the data is available for that country, then we do create scores. So we do have lots of information for each country, regardless of whether we're using low income or high income standards. So looking at the low income standards, for example, on the right to work. So on the right to a subsistence income, the UK is actually doing fairly well. This is a low income standard, but if we were to change to the high income standard, as we saw, it's actually doing very poorly. But this just means, for example, on the right to education for low and middle income, we also include the primary enrollment rates. So there is lots more information that if you're interested in education or if you're interested in a particular right or group, then you can have a look at more of the information that we have. And you can see some of these over time. So if we were to look at the right to primary education since 2007, the UK has in fact improved primary education and access to primary education in the UK. So this is some improvement. So if you're looking for information, there's lots of different information available and you can switch view and have a look at what's different. So I'm going to change back to high income. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to have a look at our civil and political rights information. So if we go to safety from the state, we can see the scores we have for physical integrity rights, what we call safety from the state. Now, this is a completely different methodology to our quality of life scores. We're not looking at international indicators. We're not taking into account level of income. So within the international law that we base these scores on, the international law does not say each country has to use its resources to the best of its ability to protect the right to freedom from torture and ill treatment. What it does say is countries should protect the right to freedom from torture and ill treatment. So it's not as much about how well a country is doing, it's a pass or fail. So for example, on all of these rights, the right from torture and ill treatment, the right to freedom from extrajudicial execution, freedom from the death penalty, freedom from forced disappearance, and freedom from arbitrary arrest. We expect each country to be doing a 10 out of 10, that is to say fully respecting these freedoms. Anything less than that is a fail, and that country is then not respecting these freedoms. So, for example, on the overall safety from the state score, we can say that the UK has a 7.6 out of 10. And we can see that this falls in the fair range. So the United Kingdom is doing a fair job of respecting safety from the state rights. And we can see that we have these purple bands. These are our uncertainty bands. So what we're saying is that our best estimate is that the score is a 7.6, but in actual fact, the score could be anywhere between a 6.5 and an 8.6. And there's a couple reasons for this. One is that the survey respondents that we're asking for their information could be giving their quite a wide range of answers. So they could be giving some different information. Or this could be that for some countries, including some very small countries and territories that we collect information is, sometimes there's very few respondents, and so we'll have quite a wide range. But for the United Kingdom, for example, there are quite a few people in the UK, and so we are able to find enough people to have good scores. So where do we get this data? We send out an expert survey to human rights experts in each country. So in this case, in the United Kingdom, people who are human rights lawyers or journalists, people who work for civil society organizations, advocating for human rights. And we ask them to share their knowledge with us. And we do this in a way that is statistically significant, using a methodology that allows us to compare different people's responses and put them on the same scale. And then we produce these data. So on freedom from arbitrary arrest, we can see that the United Kingdom is doing 6.5 out of 10. This is a fair score. On the right to torture and ill treatment, it's doing a 5.7 out of 10. This is really not a good score at all. And we can go down a little bit and see some overtime graphs. So we can see how these scores have changed over time. So for example, on freedom from extrajudicial execution, since 2017, there was a little bit of a drop, but the scores have actually gone up. And we can see that these little bands don't actually overlap. So we can say that there was definitely an improvement between 2019 and 2021. But on freedom from torture and ill treatment, these scores have actually gone down. So UK's performance has worsened. However, we can see that the bottom of this uncertainty band and the top of this uncertainty band do overlap a little bit. So we can't necessarily say that there has been a decrease. We can just say that the data suggests that there's been a decrease. Now, let's hop over to the empowerment tab. So these civil and political rights scores use the same methodology. This is our expert survey. And for empowerment, we cover 3 human rights: the right to assembly and association, the right to opinion and expression, and the right to participate in government. Now, the UK's overall score on empowerment is a 5.4 out of 10. This is a bad score for a country with so many resources that claims to be a democracy. Having an empowerment score of 5.4 out of 10 is a really poor showing. On the right to assembly and association, they get a 4.5 out of 10, which is not good at all. That's a bad score. The right to opinion and expression, the United Kingdom has a 5.4 out of 10 score. So the government is not doing a good job at all at protecting its people's right to opinion and expression. And on the right to participate in government, the country is getting a 6.7 out of 10. So once again, these are not good scores. We expect the UK to be getting a 10 out of 10 for everything, because that is completely possible. And that is what the UK has promised to do according to international law. And we've got a little bit of information here. So for example, you can see that compared with the small group of 5 high-income OECD countries, which we have civil and political rights data for, the UK is performing worse than average on empowerment rights. So quite a poor showing from the UK. And we've got our over time graphs. Now, these are really interesting because you can see that there's a clear drop on these first 2 rights, assembly and association, and opinion and expression. With quite a few, with most countries from 2019 onwards, from 2020, we saw a significant drop, especially in the right to assembly and association. And this was a response to COVID restrictions and people not being able to demonstrate in the streets. However, after 2020, so for a lot of the countries that we measure, we actually saw an increase from 2020 to 2021, when people were once again allowed out and allowed to assemble and associate. But interestingly, for the UK, it has continued to decrease since COVID restrictions were lifted. So that's a really poor showing on behalf of the UK government. And on the right to opinion expression as well, we can see that these scores continue to drop. And on the right to participate in government, there's been very little change, so very little improvement since 2017. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go and look at our people at risk data. So our people at risk data is in our expert survey when we send out our surveys to human rights experts in the UK, and we ask them to give us information on the civil and political rights in the UK. We also ask them, for each of the rights that we measure, which groups of people in particular are at high risk of having their human rights violated. So we have those people at risk data for all of the rights we measure. So even for economic and social rights, which use a different methodology, we still ask human rights experts who in particular is likely to have their rights violated. And we use that information to create these word clouds. So for example, on the right to education, we asked all of our human rights experts who in the UK in particular is at high risk of having their right to education violated. And the bigger the words in these word clouds are, the more human rights experts identify this group as being at risk. So here, 83% of human rights experts identified people from particular cultural backgrounds or castes as being at risk of having their right to education violated. And we can see, for example, on people of particular ethnicities, if that's a group you're interested in, you can then scroll down and see where this group is identified in each word cloud. And an interesting thing as well is once we ask the human rights experts which groups in particular are at risk, we then also ask them to give us a little bit of context, which you can find in these show more information sections. So if we click this, we can see what human rights expert told us about the right to education. So they said, for example, Gypsy, Roma, and traveler communities were at high risk of having their right to education violated. People from low-income communities, especially in Northern England, children with disabilities are at high risk of having their right to education violated. Black and minority ethnic boys were at particular risk of having their right to education violated. And we have this information for all of the 13 rights that we measure. Now I'm going to scroll down and go to our safety from the state rights. So on the right to freedom from arbitrary arrest, the groups that were most commonly identified as being at risk of being arbitrarily arrested were migrants and immigrants, refugees or asylum seekers, people of particular ethnicities, people of particular races, people with particular political beliefs or affiliations, people with particular religious beliefs or practices. These people were the most identified by our human rights experts as being at risk. This doesn't necessarily mean that these people are the most at risk. It just means that the human rights experts that we spoke to identified them significantly. And if we have a look here and see what information we were given on arbitrary or political arrest, we can see they said certain religious and minority ethnic groups, particularly Muslims and Black or Asian males, are vulnerable to arbitrary arrest. People participating in protests about progressive issues, particularly racism, climate change, and police violence, and people involved with the paramilitary at the borders with the Republic of Ireland, Northern Ireland, and Scottish ports. And we have this kind of information for each of the rights. So if we go and look at some of our empowerment rights, for example, the right to participate in government, we can see that survey respondents said that people with disabilities lack access to information about voting and voting venues. Minority ethnic groups, particularly Black and Asian people, were vulnerable to restrictions on their political participation. Gypsy, Roma, and traveler communities, homeless people, people from low-income communities, elderly people, women, particularly those who speak about women's rights and male violence, were vulnerable to restrictions on their political participation. People from minority ethnic groups, especially those wanting to run for elected positions, and prisoners. So there's a wealth of information here about the different groups of people in the UK who might be at highest risk of restrictions on their rights. And we've got loads of this qualitative data to give a little bit of context. So I would really encourage you to go have a play around on this page and show more information on each of these rights, because there is lots of really, really useful and really important information that we got from these survey respondents that we asked about. Finally, I'm just going to point out that you can navigate this information in a few different ways. So for example, if you were particularly interested in the right to education, you can see all of the countries together and kind of do a little comparison. So for example, what we could do is add a filter. So if we were to look just at Europe and Central Asia, just at Europe and just at high income countries, we can compare the UK's scores on the right to education compared to other high income countries in Europe, and see how well it's doing compared to its neighbours. And you can do this for any of the rights, and you can sort by different ways, and you can add lots of different country filters. That's all for me today. I encourage you to go and look at all the information that's available on human rights in the United Kingdom. And whenever you have a question or you're unsure about something, just click around. The website's very interactive. It'll give you lots of information. We've got little FAQs on the side if you have any questions that you think you'd like answered. Otherwise, do feel free to reach out to us if you have any additional questions. We're always interested in hearing from other people. So thank you very much, and I will end this session for today. Thank you.